Welcome to the writer reads The Runaway. This is part 1 of 3. In the gathering dark of the downs, campfires twinkled in a shallow valley. The commander of the troops gathered about those fires lay belly flat on the top of one of the hills bordering the camp. He looked, but nothing disturbed the smooth slope of the downs below him. After staring across the broad swathe of country his troops had to cross the next day, he turned to the sentry beside him. "Keep a watch," he said. "I can smell smoke." The sentry sniffed at the air. "I smell nothing," she said, "but the earth lies restless." The commander paused a moment, testing the truth of her words, then he nodded and slid back from the hill's crest. "Sir?" He paused. "Captain?" "They'll need a story tonight." He sighed. "I know. You'll hear it from them tomorrow." He did not see her nod in the shadow of the bush sheltering her from sight, but she did not call him again. Once he was far enough below the ridge that he could stand without creating a silhouette, the commander rose to his feet and picked his way down the slope to the central fire. He stood taller than most, but he was well proportioned, and it wasn't until he walked among other men that his height became noticeable. With darkly tanned skin and hair the rich brown of the earth of the downs, the dark blue of his eyes seemed out of place. Those eyes gazed across the gathering about the campfire and lost some of the lamplight hardness they'd gained as he'd searched the downs for his enemy. Instead, his gaze grew soft with contemplation as he thought on the story he would tell. He wished it wasn't so personal. These soldiers had seen only his strength in battle, his quick strategies and clever tactics. It seemed a pity to dispel the myth of infallibility they had built around him. Drawing himself straighter, the commander entered the firelight and found a seat amongst his men. As the quiet murmur of their speech softened to silence, he debated the wisdom of telling them this section of the tale, for while it would show them the truth of their heritage, it would also display him at a time when he had been weak, and his will to fight had fled. All eyes were on him as he eased the sword by his side and settled back from the fire. His audience was already silent, and in that silence he could feel their need to hear the story behind their homecoming. Holding back a sigh, he knew he had to tell them the tale himself. They had already heard it from other sources. Now they wanted to hear it from him, and be assured that there was hope in the battles ahead. Without further delay, the commander began. The story started at a point 2 days after his escape. The soldiers about the fire had heard that portion of the tale before, and the tale concerning the theft of the clothes he'd worn on the day that proved to be the turning point of their nation. They had already heard of how their commander had blamed himself when he thought Talitha lost and dead and gone. He had been mistaken, and that very woman sat in their midst and held no grudge against him. Besides, he thought, tilting his head so he could see the bush that sheltered the sentry on the hill, the quiet they enjoy now will not last long enough for a full retelling. Tonight they only needed to hear the confirmation of their heritage and his own, and that there was a chance of success. He looked up to meet the eyes of his audience and began. People walked past me in the street, oblivious to the wrongness of my freedom. The ladies in their long capes and hats hurried by, intent on whatever purpose possessed them. Young men walked along, talking in small animated groups, swords hanging from their belts. I watched them all, envious of their sense of place when I was so far from home, and idly contemplating my chances of luring one of the men into a nearby alley so I could take his blade. I was sitting on a bench signposted as a cab stop, and studiously ignoring the curious glances the rickshaw drivers cast my way. I had been sitting there for the best part of an hour, listening to the people's speech and watching them as they passed. They were strangers, and I took care to draw no more than the usual attention as they walked by. The wind beat at me, heavy and strong as it would have blown on the high moors of my home. At home I would have joined with it and gone soaring across the skies, but that gift had been manacled within me the first time an enemy wizard had caught me using it to escape. Stifling my bitterness, I tried to let the wind blow past me, but it insisted on buffeting me with sharp round blows, airy fists that would not let me forget. Try as I might, I could not stop the ache in my heart. I had lulled it, I thought, to sleep, but the wind's cold touch had woken it, and it reminded me of my past. Cold wind, cruel and heartless gusts. I did not want to be reminded of or remember what I had lost. I refused to lift my head. I refused to look and see what I would see, for beyond the town walls I knew I would see the ocean, and to my right the long arm of the bay that cradled the tall ships in its midst. To my left I heard the hard-booted tramp of my future. Footsteps stopped in front of me. They had been small steps, quieter than most. A little person, a child I assumed. I did not look up. The boot tramp grew in volume. "You're going to let them take you?" Her voice was young and full of scorn, though it seemed older than the small girl stopped before me. I looked up. The person was small, but not as small as some. I would have called her slight, but she gave me no time. "If you would escape them, come with me." It was a command, and much as I resented it, her words held a certain appeal. I took note of her sharp green eyes and brown red hair, and saw the tips of her ears poking through the wind-blown copper strands. She took my hand. I heard a shout, and we were running. Runners always attract attention, both from those who wish to get out of their way and those who wish to apprehend them. I heard several women protest as I pushed them aside and ran past them. My guide kept a tight grip on my hand, the strength of her grasp belied by her size. The protests grew louder from behind us. The women, it seemed, had lost hats, which were now being trampled underfoot by the soldiers who pursued us. My guide twisted suddenly right and jerked me after her. I bowled over a man and heard his curse as he slammed into a wall. There was another clatter to be heard over his cursing, followed by a shrill scolding. I heard the man's sudden gruff apology fade as my guide towed me round another bend. I also heard the shouted questions of the soldiers and my victim's indignant reply. There was a shout of thanks, and I cursed my own clumsiness as I heard bootsteps echo down the alley we had found. My guide hissed for me to be quiet as she slowed. I slowed with her. We had reached the end of the alley. A wall of red brick rose before us. I turned to her, feeling the shocked look of betrayal masking my face. She seemed unperturbed, ignoring me as she heaved at a piece of string lying in the road. I tried to stall my impatience and stay with her, in spite of the sudden sweat of fear that made me seek another way of escape. There had to be a reason for her preoccupation. A snail-like moment revealed her purpose. I stared in mute stupidity as a large piece of the wall faded, only following her through it when she dragged at my hand. As we passed between the sections of the wall, she spoke a single word. I did not understand it, but it made me hesitate as the wall began to materialize around me. Fear rose as I felt real bricks and mortar scrape at my skin. Now it was my guide's turn to curse as she pulled me free. Shouts erupted behind us. Consternation, anger, the baying of hounds about to be robbed of their prey. Amidst their cries I heard alarm, a cry of warning, and I turned to see what had caused it. One of the soldiers had leapt ahead of his fellows and almost reached the wall. "Don't!" I heard his captain shout, but it was too late. The man pushed through the rematerializing wall. My companion stopped, jerked to a halt by the sudden tightening of my grip as I froze. The wall had returned. The closest of our pursuers was trapped within its bounds. How he still lived I did not understand, but the man's scream of terrified denial echoed around me. I looked to my guide for comfort. Her face was pale, and I suspected the glistening at the edge of her eyes was tears, but their compassion was denied by the determination on her face. There was a stubborn set to her jaw as she tugged at my hand again. "Come," she commanded, and the sharpness of her command was softened only by the huskiness of regret as she led me away. I followed her away from the man in the wall, surprised when we turned 3 winding blocks later into the rear courtyard of a large house. A man waited for us by a fountain in an alcoved garden. I could see him through the arched entrance set in the wall separating the garden from the carriageway. It was framed by the flowers of a malloa vine draping over the wall's stonework. My guide led me through the archway, her gaze never wavering from the man as he turned slowly from the fountain's pool. His hair was yellow gold, fading to the colour of straw, while his face was the colour of leather, as touched by the sun as my own. He watched us approach, although I could feel his eyes on myself more than the girl who had brought me. His study made me nervous, and I was wary of drawing nearer than the fountain's opposite edge. My guide sensed my nervous reluctance and released my hand. Steady and unafraid, she advanced toward the waiting man. "I have brought him, father," she said. Then, A man stays trapped within the wall today. I hope this one was worth it." He nodded briefly at her comment, and his gaze, having temporarily rested on his daughter, returned to me. This time I felt compelled to meet his eyes.